um, for our April edition here on the 6th of April. Happy spring to everybody. For those of us that are feeling spring, we certainly are here on the West Coast. My name is Sierra Lorenz. I'm the Communications Director for Food Business School. I wanted to just let you know how this evening will proceed. In a second here, I'll be joined by Will Rosenzweig, who is the Dean and Executive Director of Food Business School. Will's going to start off by just sharing a few words about the school itself and some upcoming programs that we have to offer. And then we'll get on the line with our special guest tonight, Turow Paul. Will, if you want to come on and join us. And then we'll have a discussion between Eve and Will looking at millennials and their seemingly insatiable appetite for food. And at the conclusion of that, then we'll just have an open forum discussion for anybody that wants to learn a little bit more about Food Business School's programs and what we have coming up later on this year. Hello there, Will.
Hi, Sierra.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Great. I'll let you take it away.
Thanks. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. You are tuned into the Food Business School. We are the Center for Executive and Graduate Education of the Culinary Institute of America. The CIA is a nonprofit accredited college based in Hyde Park, New York, with campuses in California, San Antonio, and Singapore. And we are the first business school dedicated to food systems innovation and entrepreneurship. And we've been in existence about a year. The CIA has been around for 70 years. So we're a new kind of business school. We're helping to prepare leaders to really set an example for innovation in the food system in the coming years. And we're working with recent graduates. We're working with entrepreneurs and people growing food businesses, and we're working with some of the largest food businesses in the world that are grappling with many of the dynamic changes that are afoot. And we try to prepare people to be thoughtful, ethical leaders who understand the dynamics and dimensions of the food system. We incorporate the principles of ethical leadership and decision-making, systems thinking, and entrepreneurial resourcefulness into everything we do. Really are working to help people learn how to identify opportunities and transform them into new businesses. So without much further ado, I would really like to introduce Eve Turow Paul this evening. And Eve is a very talented author and consultant who has taken it upon herself to follow her own curiosity, hi Eve, to understand this very interesting phenomena of the millennials in food. And she's the author of Generation Yum, A Taste of Generation Yum, which is a book that I really enjoyed. And I particularly enjoyed it because I felt that Eve really followed her passion and her heart and her own interests in capturing a lot of really fascinating content. And if you follow the news at all, you're seeing every day something about the purchasing power of millennials or the fascination of millennials, sometimes the narcissism of millennials. But in any case, the media has taken to classifying millennials as a demographic or a market, and this is very interesting with food. And so I thought we'd spend a bit of time. Eve, would love for you to tell us about what the impetus was for your writing, where that's led you, and what's really fascinating in capturing your imagination these days.
Sure. Well, first, thank you very much for the intro. I'm happy to be here. And I look forward to getting questions from people eager to know what others are interested in as well. So my research on this topic started about 4.5 years ago. I was in graduate school. I needed an assignment to fulfill my thesis. And I I had been working as a food writer for several years, and I was taking a break during class and realized that everyone's eyes were down to their phones and that they were talking about food. They were talking about where they had gone for dinner. They were talking about different chefs, and we were a bunch of really broke writers in grad school living in New York City, and I was thinking about, like, why are we spending the little money that we have on a dinner in someone's basement that's not cooked by a chef? And I really wanted to get to the bottom of it and started looking into it, and spent the last 4 years then interviewing millennials across the country. And I talked to people who are participating in food in a variety of ways. So I talked to people who make lists of restaurants they want to try, all the way to people who said, you know what, screw this, I don't want to be a cardiologist, I want to be an organic farmer. And then spent many, many hours in the library looking at the latest research in psychology and sociology and behavior to see about what kind of research had been done that tangentially relates to the topic. And then also chatted with some of the leading luminaries in the food scene, like Mark Bittman, Michael Pollan, Anthony Bourdain, to get their feedback on this main question of why are young people today investing so much time and energy and passion into food? Because if you look back at what young people spent money on, right, it was, my parents spent it on drugs and on music. And never before have young people been spending their money on food, but they are today. And that, of course, should be of an integral consideration for anyone going into business.
So what did you take away from that? What are some of the, is this a foodie movement, or is it a food movement?
So I very purposely call millennials who are participating in food yummers instead of foodies, because I think foodies today has the kind of this negative connotation. You think of someone who's superficial. And especially the young farmers I talked to, they were like, oh, don't call me a foodie. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to label you yummers as the subset of the generation who's participating in food and interested in food and spending their money on it. And I really didn't think that this subject was going to be more than my thesis article. And as I dug deeper, it became far more interesting as I unpeeled the layers. So ultimately, after several years of research, I came to understand food as an anti-technology. So that may sound surprising to some people because they're like, what does food have to do with tech? But the role that food is playing in millennial culture is not national. It's very global. You're seeing a rising importance in spending in food around the world, especially in urban centers. And what separates young people today from young people who have always existed before is technology. And we are really the guinea pigs of this kind of lifestyle where we're constantly in contact with screens, and our lives are infused in this digital space. And in time, it became very clear that our relationship with food is growing in a direct reaction to that digital time. So, you know, food is providing community, it's providing sensory stimulation, it's providing a way for us to better define our own identities and project our own identities. And more than anything, what I began to understand was the rising levels of anxiety and depression among young people, and the fact that food puts you in the driver's seat. It gives you the authority. And there's really very few things today that we feel that we have great authority over. Yeah, those are my main theses.
So that's fascinating. So you're saying in some ways this generation is finding food to be an antidote to the fast-paced technological kind of transactional culture, and it's bringing sensory experience, emotion, feeling back into people's lives. It's also something, what I'm hearing you say, it's kind of ripe for reinvention and or re-identification. So as people are classically in American culture identified by the car they drive, this is a generation that's being defined by the food they choose to eat.
Right.
Is this manifesting in similar stratification that we're finding economy? Are there haves and have-nots? Is this widely held across the country, or is it basically on the coasts? How's it playing out in different economic areas too?
Yeah. Well, so the economic part of it is something I really want to spend more time on. It became very clear to me that the people with money to spend in food obviously are people middle and high income, right? Because there's a vast number of millennials who are on the SNAP program, who have no idea where their next meal is coming from, who would not be able to find quinoa in their local grocer. But I think it's really important to recognize that this is not like a LA, New York thing. I'm preparing right now to present in Korea, and I'm doing a lot of research on millennials in Asia, and they're seeing the exact same things happening there. I mean, there's obviously some differences. People in Singapore are apparently more trusting of their government officials than we are here in the States. But a lot of the same trends are occurring around the world, whether that's going to be Europe, Asia, even the Middle East. And it really, the connecting line between all of these young people who are participating in food and celebrating food and learning about it is their time spent online. So it's partially like, yes, you can go look up recipes online, right? So you have internet access. But we're finding that young people are actually more likely to put down their phones at meals than people in other generations. That there's an exceeding emphasis on the importance of emotional connection, of sensory stimulation. And, you know, there's, I think, some key parts of this that are important for entrepreneurs to be taking into account. In Silicon Valley, especially, you hear a lot of conversation about delivery, right? Everything's going to be delivered. And everyone's like, convenience is the main thing. But I think what a lot of people are forgetting is, you know, what is the purpose of food? Why do people love it in the first place? And it's because of these very human elements of connection, of resonating with those around you. There was a great quote in the New York Times this week. Kim Severson wrote about Blue Apron. And Blue Apron's great for a lot of reasons. But it ended with this idea of, you know, who's going to remember, who's going to say, like, oh, remember that great Blue Apron meal we had? No, like, you're going to remember, like, the amazing tagine that you made over several hours while you had your friends at your house and you were drinking 3 bottles of wine.
So I'm hearing in this some attempt to return to maybe a slower time, a time of savoring more experience, more communal interaction. So is this, do you feel like the millennial culture will ultimately reject or reshape our kind of fast food nation? Is that part of what's going on, or am I over projecting perhaps the potential?
I don't know if you're over projecting. I mean, I think about this a lot, and I think there inevitably is going to be a balance between convenience and returning to what's important about life, what makes life joyous. And, you know, convenience is going to be important because you're going to have a growing number of households where both spouses are working, right? So there's a limited amount of time. But those millennials who are having kids are also more than ever concerned with what they're feeding their children. They also, I was reading some statistics today from a research group out of Boston. That was about how I think it was like 83, I just posted on Twitter, you can go look, but over 80% of millennials ranked that they find it important for their children to understand that things are not what brings happiness.
Right.
And so I think that there is going to be a little bit of a rebellion to the society that we've created of Amazon Prime and the importance of that.
We want to welcome your questions. Somebody's sent us a question about millennials in Latin America. We want to invite you to type your questions in the box below. We'd love to see them. Post a few of them, and then I'll try to sort them through with Eve and weave them into the conversation. But so Eve, there's also another generation who are the digital natives. These are people who are actually born with an iPhone in their hand when they arrive in the world, and they know no other existence other than the multitude of ubiquitous screens in their lives. I see these young people at dinner sometimes, ironically, going to a very nice restaurant where at the next table I see parents trying to pacify and entertain their children with iPhones and iPads. But some of those are growing up now. What are you learning about Generation Z with respect to food, and how are they different than the
Like the key question today, right? It's like we want to understand those kids in junior high, and I think the truth of it is that they're still forming their own tastes. But the early indicators are showing that they are even more interested in food than millennials. I mean, you can look at media today and see that, right? You have Chopped Juniors, and you have kids on there who are far better cooks than I am and know about things that are far more sophisticated than what certainly people knew about when I was in junior high. But there's also some interesting research that's coming in about really younger, meaning digital natives, Gen Z, whatever you want to call them, people really starting to process the dangers of always being connected. And I think Snapchat's a really great example, actually. So a lot of older people don't understand Snapchat. They're like, why would you do that? It disappears right away. And there's a really interesting psychology to it. So all of these other social media sites that we have, like Facebook and LinkedIn and OkCupid, you need to build your own brand, right? And people are using food for that. And I tell anyone that's creating a food company, you need to think about, why would someone want to post a picture of this item on their own wall? Why would they want to make it part of their own personal brand? Because that's going to last, and it says something about them. They're trying to project something about themselves. Snapchat doesn't do that. Snapchat is about being in the moment, and it is the social media platform that's the closest thing that we have to reality. You need to be paying attention, otherwise it's going to be gone. The photo is going to be put away, the bus will have driven away. And I think that it's really a telling sign that young people and digital natives are pioneering this platform and making it so important. And I see food playing an even bigger and more integral role in their livelihoods, especially because they're going to be raised in this environment now that's more focused on organic and real food, whole food, and eventually will be raised by millennials as well.
It seems like we have these different food systems working concurrently. One of our listeners has asked, with 3D food printing and other technologies, will that connect us or disconnect us from food? And, it's interesting that the applications that I've seen of 3D printing to date have been kind of ornamental. We're not actually creating food. We're sort of reprocessing food through a printer. Some of the things I've seen that have been done in baking and in confectionery, and to be able to create really cool shapes of things, they're more of a novelty right now. Yeah, they're a form of presentation as opposed to actual production or creation. It's conceivable some of these printers are going to be able to print drugs soon. So it'll be interesting to see how a 3D printer might assemble different nutrients to to augment food. But I'm not quite sure how that will manifest itself in. Is this something, do you think millennials are intrigued with, or is it just a novelty?
I mean, I think that millennials are intrigued with synthetic biology foods. I think there's this interesting lesson to be learned from GMOs, which is that millennials want to understand the transparency of it. They want to understand how it's made. They want to understand what's in it. But once they do, I think they're completely open to experimentation. And the most interesting thing about 3D printing to me is 3D printing with the microbiome and the possibility of being able to print a food that is ideal for your own microbiome. Right, so say you wear a device that's like a Fitbit that's going to communicate with a 3D printer what exactly you need. And I mean, you already see today people who are obsessed with measuring their body weight and their muscle mass and are going I shouldn't say anything bad about CrossFit. I don't know who's on here right now, but I think that it will just increase the possibilities and ways in which people can obsess over perfecting their own bodies and their own health. It also, I hope, will provide a way for medicine to become more focused on nutrition in a way that'll be more accessible.
So it'll play into the personalization of nutrition. And we actually had a great talk with Bruce German a few weeks ago about the microbiome. And so that's very an interesting application of technology in food. You know, and that is in contrast to the soaring interest in local farm to table, even people growing it themselves. And, you know, I'm just really intrigued with that. Do you think that the millennial generation is coming back into this because their parents were so busy working that they never got a chance to cook? Or what research do you have around that?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of it really has to do, okay, partially it's, yes, being raised on packets of taco seasoning, right? Like, at least in my family. You know, a huge part of it is the obesity and diabetes epidemic. We're starting to understand that these processed foods have a significant negative effect on our health. So part of it is like a really practical, you know, action-reaction. But another big part of this has to do with anxiety. And this is the most anxious generation on record. And that's for a multitude of reasons. So partially it's because we graduated into the recession. We played by the rules and then we're not rewarded by society. We've experienced 9/11 from a very young age and Bush v. Gore, where the person with the popular vote didn't win. And it really instilled kind of a lack of trust in authority figures. At the same time, we now have climate change that's becoming more and more and more of a daily reality than it was 20 years ago. It was something that was talked about, but it was very intangible. And today, you know, in December, I was sitting outside my backyard in Brooklyn in flip-flops. And this is something that you're seeing globally. Some young people have more trust in their governments than others. But generally speaking, we as a generation feel like we're lacking control. And through food, you get to decide what it is that you're eating at least 3 times a day. And you're seeing the ramifications of this in calls for simple food, for simple ingredients, for transparency. And it's kind of a reaction of like, gosh darn it, if I don't know if I'm going to have enough money to buy a house, and I don't know if anyone on OkCupid is going to like me, and I have no idea how to use my iPhone, and I don't know what to do about climate change, the very least I can do is control what it is that I'm eating.
So, Eve, you've been around the world. You've been traveling around the world quite a bit. Can you share some of the questions here are about what are you seeing? How are different cultures similar or different around the world with respect to their relationship to food? Is this a global phenomena? And maybe you could share a couple of insights from your recent travels. You were just in Spain, right?
I was just in Spain, and I was in Japan. I'm going to Korea next week, 2 weeks from now. Well, I think I lost your video, but there you are. You're back.
Yeah, I'm here.
No, I think the similarities are actually shocking. I did my research in the U.S. and I've been doing it as a student and doing what was available to me. And honestly, selfishly, I wanted to understand myself. And the book came out in July, and I immediately got calls from around the world of people saying this is happening here too. So it's been written about in Brussels and Germany and Spain, and been on the radio in New Zealand and Australia. You know, it's very much not specific to the United States. So you're going to see variations of the reaction and engagement in food depending on the culture. For example, in China, they're far more trusting of processed foods because they're so lacking in trust of the food that's grown within their own country. But you're seeing this amazing experimentation with food among young people, and there's something called dark cuisine, which is these food stalls that they set up at night where they experiment with the crazy flavors and combinations. And food is really being used as this way of self-expression and kind of like pushing the boundaries of what's possible. And, you know, it's just showing up in all these different ways. In Spain, with the recession there being particularly terrible. There's a return to comfort food. So there's a lot of food trucks now and restaurants and pop-ups that are focused on the meals that people's mothers used to make them. And there's kind of like this soothing through eating. So it's definitely a global trend. It is definitely related to anxiety. But obviously every culture is unique. And, you know, I think especially outside the U.S., you know, other countries already know, like, there's a community around food. In the U.S., we forgot that for a little bit.
So there's enormous social issues with food. There's food insecurity. I mean, 17 million people in the United States go to bed hungry each night. There's even maybe higher than that. There's at UC Berkeley, where I'm also teach, there's enormous issues with getting food to student body, you know, who here are in a very, you know, abundant state, California, of food, and in a prestigious, you know, institution of higher learning. There's big issues with respect to food waste, and you know, and food equity. We're seeing, you know, the minimum wage going up, but that's going to have a huge impact on the service industries. Doesn't necessarily start to address some of the issues that farmers have. But how do we engage millennials? And you and I have talked about this before, but how do we move from this being a yummer to actually somebody that's a carer or a doer, who's an activist? Yeah, I've heard that's from your parents' generation. That
very 70s.
Yeah, how does go ahead.
I think that young people today are beginning to realize that the biggest issues that we're going to face as a generation all have to do with agriculture. They all have to do with food. They have to do with the way that we grow our food and the way that we distribute our food. So as a researcher, I try to be very practical in my research. I take it for what it is. I don't try to mold it into something that I wish it was. And the bottom line of what I discovered is that we are the most narcissistic generation that is on record. And that's for a variety of other reasons. I'm not blaming us. That's, you know, has its purpose. But we, and I, all people, have trouble becoming motivated on issues that are less tangible to them. So we're seeing motivation around pesticides and GMOs and antibiotics because those are things that you see in the grocery store that you know that you are personally ingesting. Things such as the degradation of topsoil, of minimum wage, of the kid that's going hungry every night in the Bronx. Those things are less tangible for young people, and there is a limit to how engaged they're becoming. But I think that food waste is a great example of how momentum can be encouraged. And whether we like it or not, and I think this is great, chefs are the new rock stars. They have an incredible amount of power. And it's not like food waste is a big issue, but if you weren't paying attention, you would think that like in the last 3 months, it was suddenly discovered. And that's in large part because of Dan Barber's pop-up Wasted in New York City, and then his collaboration with Sweet Green, and then also Roy Choi opening up Local in California and bringing the issue of food waste onto the pages of Grub Street and Eater and Food Network and kind of starting this bigger conversation. And I think it's really important for entrepreneurs, though you yourself may think that food access is incredibly important or that soil nutrition and carbon sequestration is really important. I think it's incredibly important for everyone to recognize that most people do not care about things just because they're important to humanity. They care about them because it's going to serve them in some way. So you need to think about how do you make this issue something that a millennial would want to make a part of their personal brand and gloat about and feel good about.
What I'm really hearing from you, Eve, is how important understanding of some of the climate sciences, human nutrition, also the interdependence of these social issues. And I think, you know, this gets to the heart of what we're really trying to do at the Food Business School is to identify that in a interconnected food system, it's very challenging to make change. You have to have an awareness of the policies that are in place and where the policies are going. In order to innovate, you really have to be connected to so many aspects of and gain an understanding of the system. So what do you recommend to the people that are with us today and the people that might be watching this in the future? How do people get involved? Where do you start? How can you move from, foodie to yummer to transformer for your generation so that the millennial generation actually emerges as the heroes of this century?
We should. But so in my answer, I'm going to address a couple of the questions that have been coming in. So I think it's really important to recognize that we're at this incredibly pivotal moment in the food industry, right? So some of the questions are about big food. What's the role of big food going to be? And because young people are beginning to become aware of these issues and care about these issues in a whole new way, it's really opening the door for all of these new innovators. So the opportunity is so ripe, it's so there for the taking. And it's really exciting to see all the innovation that's currently happening. And I think this is a great space for people to be jumping into because I think the door is absolutely wide open and the public has pushed it open for you. What I think is really important to recognize is that, and this relates to another question that came in, what's the role of brands? People are not shopping today based on price point, or I shouldn't say that. People are not going back to brands based on price point. Because really, if you're shopping for something, you're going to go on Amazon or wherever, and you're going to compare prices. You're going to buy the thing that's cheapest and that looks reliable and fine enough to you, right? The reason why people become attached to a specific brand now is because of their value systems. It's because of what they stand for. And it's about creating an emotional connection. And people today are craving that. They're craving connection with one another, of reliability. I think eventually we're going to get past the stage of tell me your story, and people are just going to want brands that they know that they can go to, that are reliable, that they don't have to think about. And so right now we're in this phase where you need to make it really clear to people, this is why we care about you, this is why you should care about us, we're in this together, and here's what we provide you, whether it's a product or a service or whatever it may be. And with anything with business, it's about finding whatever you're passionate about and going, all the way with it.
And do you think a commitment to transparency sort of undergirds that? Because as you mentioned, these existing brands, they're all trying to reinvent themselves. They're taking red dye out of their product. They're switching to non-GMO or natural ingredients. A lot of the brands that were your parents' brands are trying to reassert themselves that they deserve another, generation's business. What's your take on the role of transparency, and how do you think of that as being something that might be a competitive advantage when speaking to millennials or seeking them as customers?
I think it's absolutely essential. So again, going back to anxiety and control, you need to make your customer feel as though they are in the driver's seat, and let them make the most educated decision possible. And the companies that you're seeing that are doing incredibly well today are super transparent. Even if not everyone is going onto the website and looking at the blog that explains every single ingredient, people know that it's there and that a company is not trying to hide it. Again, I think GMO is a great example of how this can backfire when you aren't transparent, when you aren't open about what it is that you're doing and how something is being created. So I think it's going to be a massive competitive advantage, and I also think that entrepreneurs today need to think about what is it that they can offer that big food can't. And big food's having a really hard time shifting to transparency, because I'm sure there are a lot of things that wouldn't please people about the way that their food is currently being made. And granted, that's what people had been okay with, and that was the status quo for a long time, and now they're scrambling to figure out how they can reinvent themselves to serve this community. But small companies are far more agile and can be doing this from the get-go. There's no need to reinvent.
We've often talked about that it's fairly easy to get into the food business because everybody's an eater, so that gives them some expertise and confidence that they know what at least they like. And the barriers to entry are low, but the challenges to scale tend to be enormous. And there's been a couple of very high-profile financings of new companies recently that seem to be in the news every day. We just saw Juicero this week make it in the New York Times. They launched their $700 juice machine and system. And there was another article I saw today about one of the plant-based food companies that's raised almost $200 million but doesn't have a product yet. And I guess I just wanted to say that I think we're going to see, as we always do in any kind of high-profile venture-backed companies, we're going to see failures. But I also think that this is not necessarily a sign of a decline in the importance of the issues that are underlying, the whole food system. I think that, it's important to really help people focus on what the real problems are. I think nobody really has a problem that a $700 juice maker fixes, right? So how do you think about steering people's intentions toward the issues that are, most pressing and most impactful and probably ultimately over a lifetime most rewarding?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, I just wrote a piece about soil, and I tried to frame it in this way that would make people care about it, and that I was saying, better soil means better nutrients, which means better tasting food for you. And, I don't really care if someone starts to pay attention to soil because they just want to eat better tasting food, or if they're genuinely concerned about carbon sequestration. And I think it's important to understand the impact of the way that we grow food, the way that we distribute food, and also understand the psychology of marketing and how you can engage the greatest number of people so that you can make the greatest impact. And there's a practicality to all of this and also great opportunity.
This has been great. It's always fun to talk to you, Eve, and I really appreciate you coming on to share your wisdom and research. Yeah, and I think the topics that we touched on today are so exemplary of what we're really trying to get at in the Food Business School, and to provide a curriculum that can help people gain the skills and the confidence and the network that they need to take an active role as an innovator in the food system and in the opportunities ahead. So thanks for this, and I'm going to ask Sierra to come back and lead us through to the final few minutes. Thanks again, Eve.
All right, thank you.
Good night. Bye.
Great, thank you as well, Eve. That was fabulous. Lots of great questions from you participants as well, and I hope we covered most of them. Maybe one or two that we can follow up with application. We have your emails here, so we can get in touch. Will, I'd like to thank you as well for your time tonight. Relieved of duty, super interesting conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Always fun. Thanks for organizing it here. Good night.
My pleasure. Great, and just a reminder to everybody that we will be sending you the recording of tonight's presentation if you need a repeat performance, or maybe want to send it along to a friend that wasn't able to join us tonight. So quickly, just to wrap things up for the evening, I want to just mention to you we've got two pretty exciting courses coming up this summer. Both are in the greater Bay Area here in California. One is our Food Venture Lab, and this is actually a week-long version of the 15-week program that we're just getting towards the end of here this spring. It's been really popular. And the week-long version is going to be in June at the new Culinary Institute of America at Copia, which is in downtown Napa. Lovely place to spend a week in June. And the Food Venture Lab is really a crash course in venture design within the food system space. You're going to learn everything from market research to the tools of rapid prototyping, and how you're really going to pull together the different pieces you need to put a business plan together to launch a new venture. And there's several guest speakers that are coming to that are pretty exciting, including Gary Hirschberg from Stonyfield and a couple other folks, and that's all on the website to check out. Another course coming up is in May, and this is the third round of our Scale Up Your Authentic Food Business. This is a 3-day program. It'll be in San Francisco. Our friends at Babson College are actually going to be hosting for us. And this is taught by Will Rosenzweig, who you just had the pleasure of hearing from. And this course is for those of you that are farther along with your food business, that have seen success, and are now wondering what you want to do next. You're ready to take things to the next level. You're ready to scale, but aren't quite sure, what direction to go in, or the direction, but you're wondering, how are you going to do this well and with a real plan in front of you and a blueprint. And so it's a 3-day program to have you narrow in on that goal of going to the next level and putting together a blueprint for getting there. You can find out more information about both of those programs on our website, foodbusinessschool.org, and the email we send along will have a little bit more information on that as well. Closing note, I want to just thank you again for attending this evening, and invite you to reach out to us if you do have any questions about upcoming programs, either of the two that I mentioned. We also have a suite of online programs that will be resuming in September of this year. I think there's 6 on the docket, and if you're on our mailing list, you'll hear more about that. But if you're anxious to learn more, go ahead and reach out to us at admissions@foodbusinessschool.org. In addition, for joining us this evening, I wanted to pass along a special rate code for you, which is FBS15, and that's just a little thank you for joining us to get you a 15% off special rate for your first course with us. I look forward to speaking to probably many of you over the next maybe couple weeks or a couple months to learn more about Food Business School. Otherwise, I'll wish you a happy evening, and thank you again.